Welcome to Inside the Practice, your go-to podcast for expert-led discussions and actionable insights in the world of dentistry, in the dental specialties, and beyond. My co-host, Sarah Boylan, is here with us as always. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Alan. Thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. Always good to have you. We have a great guest today, somebody that I know personally, I've known for a number of years, Dr. Patrick Lillis. Pat, great to have you.
Thanks, Alan, for having me. It's really an honor to be here, and I always enjoy our time together, so thank you.
Pat is a leading expert in implant and cosmetic dentistry. He's done advanced training at University of Missouri, Kansas City. He is a graduate of Creighton University Dental School. He runs a thriving practice, lectures across the country on full mouth rehab and aesthetic dentistry, and he collaborates with top professionals in the latest dental innovations. I had the pleasure of seeing Pat speak not long ago in Seattle. He was talking to a group of specialists there and other doctors and GPs, talking about integration of digital technology in their practices and how they could collaborate. Very, very insightful and great speaker. And when he's not in his clinic or he's not doing his speaking engagement, he's enjoying life with his family, running and skiing, golfing too. All right, Pat, great to have you here. We'll jump into the conversation, but I'm delighted to have you aboard here with us, Pat.
Well, thanks, Alan, for having me. And as always, it's always good to see you and everybody here. And thank you for all that you do for dentistry and specialists and all of us working together. We really appreciate all your collaboration. And we can't do what we do without you all. So we appreciate what you all do. So thanks so much.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Kind words, and I do appreciate it. Well, let's jump in here on your journey, which I'm interested in. What pulled you towards teaching while you were still running a very busy practice, and you decided that you were going to start teaching? In particular, I mean, we know how busy a dentist can be. I mean, when you're not at chairside, nothing is happening. So being a clinician and an educator it's an interesting mix, and not only in terms of time. And I'm interested also as part of that question on how that's changed how you see the profession.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny is that I had no aspirations to teach whatsoever.
Really? Okay.
I finished my residency at UMKC and I went into private practice, and the person that I was practicing with, Dr. Bernie Williams, was probably one of the more foremost leaders in TMJ and occlusion, and taught all over the nation. In fact, Bernie would leave and I would hold down the fort in the practice while he was out teaching. And he kind of came home one day, and between him and an implant rep, they said, you ought to get into teaching. I think you'd be pretty good at it. I think you'd like it. And of course, the first words out of my mouth were, I have no interest. I mean, I'm here, I'm working, I'm totally fine here. I don't need to get on the road and do any of that. And I don't know if anybody would even want to listen to what I have to say anyway. So I'll just kind of hunker down here. And so, but as time wore on, I one of the implant reps again circled back and wouldn't take no for an answer. So I did my first lecturing gig in Manhattan, Kansas, of all places. It's about 2 hours west of Kansas City in a small little lovely town. And it was on a Thursday evening to a local study club. And I figured, if I fail or I flop, it's not going to be that big a deal. A tree falls in the middle of the forest, nobody's going to hear it. So I did the lecture, and I got to tell you, leading up to the lecture, I really enjoyed putting content together. And during the lecture, I really loved the interaction, and I was just totally surprised that people wanted to listen to what we had to say. And I didn't really think it was anything magical. It was stuff that we were doing in our practice day to day. But what I realized is that what we were doing in our practice and outside of our four walls was pretty special between Bernie and myself. And so, then I kind of felt like a duty to share that information with other people. And then 20 years later, which is kind of crazy, in many, many lectures and many, many different venues and many, many missed flights and canceled flights, and it's all glamour being a speaker. I have to tell you that the thing I enjoy about it the most is it's made me a better clinician. And it's, if you're going to take a picture and you're going to put it up on a big screen in front of a lot of people, you're kind of making sure that everything is done correctly. You make sure that the ceramic is just a little bit better, that the preps are just a little bit better, but the content we're doing is backed up by evidence. And so it's pushed me to be a better clinician. And I never really ever thought it was ever going to do that. And that's what it did. And so I think that was one of the bigger surprises that I found in the last 20 years, is just that little bit more before we're going to take a picture of it and put it to an audience. And I think that's what I've enjoyed, and that's what surprised me the most.
Really interesting. Everything you're saying resonates, really resonates with me. I know all about those missed flights. Yes. It's for people like you and myself and others who do this a lot, that interaction that you mentioned with individuals, with professionals. I mean, I wouldn't, they're not my colleagues, but they're professionals. And it's a continuous learning and development, personal development thing that I find. So I'm very, very interested in what you have to say. And how do you think this is impacted? It must give you a broader view of the profession and a certain kind of objectivity, if that's the right word, of what your colleagues are doing. I'm interested in your thoughts about that.
Yeah, one of the joys of it, and the other aspect is that I learn a lot as well. So yeah, the advantage of it is that I get to go out of the Midwest, because I'm based in Kansas City, and I get to go to the West Coast and the East Coast and down south and up north. And it's really interesting to see the different techniques and the different things that people are doing across the nation. And it's really kind of opened my aperture into my own practice. And so I get to bring things back to the office that I learned along the way. And I think that's been probably the special thing, but also the relationships over the years. I think, dentistry is dentistry and it's a lovely profession, but the relationships are what make it. And the relationships with your patients, who essentially become like family. And then also people like you and other people that we've met along the way, different surgeons and periodontists and orthodontists, and just different avenues that has been in this world, has been pretty transformative for me personally and professionally. And I think that's truthfully what makes this profession so great, are the people you run into along the road. And I think that's what's interesting too, is that this is a big profession, but it's also a very small profession. The degrees that everybody knows each other are not that far out. And so, you run into somebody and in about 2 or 3 names, somebody knows somebody. And I think that's truthfully what's made it pretty unique and enjoyable for the last however many years I've been doing this, has been that aspect.
Very interesting that you say that. Yeah. I mean, you have dentists, you have practitioners all over the country, but there's only a few degrees of separation when you start to talk about it. But yeah, that's really interesting. Well, let's talk about the future of dental education.
Yeah.
There are definite trends happening. I see, and my firm sees, we see the gaps in doctors who are coming out of school, just starting. And of course, there's, for us, the administrative and management and business side, in most cases, is a real gap that we do our best to fill. But if you had to look ahead, where do you think dental education is headed over the next decade?
Yeah, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, because it's something that I've noticed probably in the last 5 to 6 years, a seismic shift. I'd say probably in the first half of my lecturing career, it was pretty much the same. We would do what we did, and we just kind of did that over and over and over again. I'd probably say the last 5 years there's been a seismic shift. This newer generation that's coming in, they have different wants and needs, but I think the underlying theme is always going to be what I just talked about, is relationships. And if it depends on who you talk to, you'll talk to some folks that'll say, well, online is going to be the future of education. And then some people say, no. I mean, in-person is going to be and I think it's going to be a hybrid of the two. I think that younger clinicians are going to definitely be seeking out online education simply because two things: cost and ease of use. If you talk to a young professional that is just graduating from dental school and they're several $100,000 in debt, having them step out of their associate role, or if they're just bought a practice or something like that, and go into a meeting, that's an expensive endeavor, because you've got to leave the office, right? So your production essentially goes to zero, and then you have to pay for the flight, pay for the hotel, pay for the tuition. That's a very, very expensive ordeal. So the natural inclination is for those clinicians just basically to do online, and that's probably what I would do too if I was in their shoes. But I think as the time progresses and they start to get a little bit more momentum in their professional career, and they get a little bit, they pay down their debt and they get a little bit more money in their back pocket, some clinicians are going to want to go out there and seek what's on that next level. And so I think that's where the hybridization, where the in-person is going to be. I think that's where in-person education, I don't think ever will leave. But I think the biggest challenge is going to be, who do you trust? Because the educational space right now is so crowded. I mean, if you Google education and dentistry, you'll get a million different avenues to go. And I think as younger doctors are coming out and they're just trying to figure out, where do I go? Who do I trust? What do I see? And I think that's going to be, as the space gets more crowded and more crowded, because it's easy. I mean, if you get a microphone and a computer nowadays, you can be quote unquote an expert. Yeah. And I think that's going to be the challenge for younger clinicians, is who do I trust and what information are they doing? And if I'm going to give up my time, which I always say in my lectures is the most valuable commodity that we all have that we can't buy more of.
Yes.
That who do I give that time to? And if I'm going to go to a lecture, it better be good, and I think that's where I see the future of dental education. I don't think it's going to be either or. I think it's going to be and I think it's going to be where you're going to see online, and I think you're going to see that in person, because as I mentioned earlier, those relationships, it's not just about the CE. I'm heavily involved in Seattle Study Club, and the CE is off the charts, and I'm very fortunate to be a speaker for them. But it's not just the CE, it's also the relationships. When you go to symposium every year and you see the people that you've seen for a long time, or you go to your local club and you've had these deep-seated relationships for years and years and years, and then you have text streams with your friends that are in those organizations. I mean, that's the biggest pearl of all of that. Yes, the CE is great and the meeting's amazing and all of the venues great, but it's those deep-seated relationships that you see over. It's not just a day or two or a week, it's the years that go on, and they help you along your way. I think that's where the future of education is going to be. I think it's just going to be a hybrid model where you're doing online and you're doing it in person, but I think it's going to be in phases. I mean, I tell people all the time, if you really want to go to high-level dentistry, go to the Coy Center. But, the Coy Center is going to be $50,000 plus time out of your practice. I mean, that's a huge reach for somebody that's coming out that's $400,000 or $500,000 in debt. So I think that's where I see the future of CE going. I don't think it's going to be a big in-person meeting anymore. I think it's going to be these kind of smaller venues. I think the big meetings will still have their place for sure. I'm not saying it won't, but I think dentists are going to really kind of crave these smaller venues, and also they're going to get it online too, which I think is great.
Yeah. Appreciate that very much. I tend to agree with you. What are the skills, Pat? What are the skills that you see that new grads are missing when they come out of school?
I think the biggest thing I'm seeing is that the lack of diagnosis and treatment planning. And, that's in a lot of the courses I teach. That's my favorite course I give, is the diagnosis and treatment planning section. And over probably the last 5 to 6, 7, 8 years, I just have seen a seismic shift in that. I just think the experience level that younger clinicians are getting, it's a lot less than maybe when I graduated. And especially the COVID graduates, where they got gypped out of a lot of clinical time and they still graduated. And so I think that's the biggest thing I'm seeing now, is just the aperture is so small for people coming out. They know enough just to do what I would call transactional dentistry, which is drill, fill, bill, and next person up. And I think, the lack of understanding tooth wear and TMJs and TMDs and oral facial pain and musculature and all of the things that we learned as residents. I think that's really where I see the biggest challenge going forward. And I think that's probably going to be, where, in my opinion, where I think we should probably focus as educators really going in the next decade or so.
Very interesting. I agree with you completely. We see the same thing. Our firm, at ePractice Manager, we've always, well, not always, but certainly since COVID, we started to examine and really study the data on dentistry and systemic care and overall health. And we're very, very big on instituting education and practices so staff understand that. But really, it requires doctors understanding and being willing to embrace that, Pat. People like, well-known, groundbreaking scientists like Nathan Bryan in Texas have talked about how dentists really are the people who can do more for people's health than any other health practitioners. And his research on that and the science and all of his studies of nitric oxide really support that. Anyway, I agree with you. It's very interesting. Don't get me started. I love hearing this. Well, I know Sarah wants that, we want to talk about mentorship, because really what you're talking about, when we talk to associates and newer grads, they say, well, I'm looking for a relationship with the doctor. I need somebody to mentor me. And frankly, it generally falls short. It just doesn't happen as much as I think either the doctor or the associate would like. And Sarah, I know that you had some good questions you had brought up before the podcast about that.
I did. Thank you, Alan. And it's about mentorship in modern dentistry. So, at this point, what does good mentorship look like in dentistry today? And do you feel like that has changed over time?
Yeah, that kind of dovetails back to what we talked about with the online. I think that's what you're missing. If online education is great, but it misses that key component of mentorship. And you really only find that when you get involved in one of these CE camps. And I think that's the special part about it, right? So I was lucky enough that my grandfather, I grew up 5 houses from him in Des Moines, Iowa, and he was a dentist, and that's how I got into this gig. And that was my first mentor. And when I was 13, I was in the laboratory waxing and casting gold inlays. And that was a great experience. I learned how to work with my hands and how to manipulate wax, and that worked out pretty good when I was a first-year dental student. But the bigger thing I saw and the bigger thing I had with him was I saw how he interacted with patients and how he interacted with his team and his leadership skills and how he handled himself professionally in the community. And that was all stuff that I pretty much took for granted. But I got a front row seat to see how it was on all those facets, because just being a dentist, it's not just about doing dentistry. It's about all those things I just mentioned. I mean, how to lead your team. I think that's the biggest challenge I see is, and it's not taught in dental school, is how to be a leader, because it doesn't matter if you're an associate or you're a practice owner, you're still leading a team every day. You're leading a team and they're looking to you for leadership. I used to think that, well, they lead the practice and I just follow. It's not true. They're going to follow wherever you go if you inspire them. And so I think that's what I saw with my grandpa as my first mentor. And then my second mentor was Bob Margis, Dr. Bob Margis, who's in Des Moines as well. So I've known Bob since I was 14. And so those are text streams every single day. And so I think that's, if you really want to get to the special part of dentistry, the mentorship is critical to success. If you've got to figure it out by yourself, because we're on an island, it's going to be a long road. And that mentorship, and I think that the biggest thing that I try to do is pick older mentors that have been very successful and just try to listen to what they did and try to follow their lead, because they've already been there. They've already stubbed their toe and fallen on their face, and they're there to give you invaluable information. And I think the younger generation sometimes misses that a little bit. They need that connectivity to the older generation that I think is so critical in what goes on. But I think, Alan, your point is valid here, is that's where the in-person CE, because you're going to go and you're going to listen to the courses that are given, but then it's going to be the cocktail hour afterwards where you're going to sit at the bar, and that's where you're really going to forge these friendships and mentorships that are going to last your career. It's critical. It's absolutely critical, in my opinion.
That's
Couldn't
amazing.
agree. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, Sari. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, Alan. I was just wanted to follow up because he just, touched on my two other questions I had about mentorship. How cool that your grandpa got you started right at the bench there. That's awesome. So you also touched a little bit about how important it is for seasoned doctors to, reach out there. Do you have any advice for seasoned dentists who want to support younger colleagues and how to branch out and get in touch with people?
Yeah, I would say that if I was just starting again, I tell younger clinicians, just go up and just talk to people, because I think sometimes younger dentists think that like older dentists just are not very approachable and they don't want to help them, and that's not true at all. I think that's where the first hurdle you have to get over is just go for it. If you're really kind of jiving with what's going on when they're given a lecture and there's something that's speaking to you, go up after the lecture and ask questions, and then maybe ask them, would you be willing to mentor me? But my advice then is the person that's asking to it, I'll say, I think we'll say yes, as long as you listen and kind of do what we suggest, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that, in my mentor group, we have old and me, who I guess is older now. And then we have a couple younger clinicians, and they're awesome because they're like sponges. And you really love helping them out because they ask questions, they listen to what you have to say, and vice versa. We listen to what they have to say because they have a different perspective than we do, like, social media and marketing and all that kind of stuff. That older people, we didn't grow up with that. That wasn't even a thought when I started my practice. So I think it's a vice versa relationship that needs to happen. But I would say if I was the younger clinician, go do it. And as far as this older dentists, we need to mentor the younger dentists, because let's be honest, they're the future. I mean, the future isn't me. The future is these younger doctors that are coming in. They're the ones that are going to carry this torch for many more decades. And I think the profession would be better if we help them along the way.
Well said. Well said. Yes. And, it sets an example, Pat, that it sets an example, the way it set an example for you. So I'm not surprised that you're doing this. And last night, it's interesting. My wife and I were out having dinner. There were a lot of younger people in the restaurant. It's prom time. We were getting a kick out of the outfits. They were so great. But I was sitting there having dinner and looking around and contemplating over a glass of wine all of these young people and thinking, this is our future. This is the future. This is our future. This is this is the next generation. And how we set an example and teach them is just, it's vitally important. I try to apply, and I've learned, and this is why I'm very interested in what you're saying, and I admire you for this, because really we're as valuable as we can help others.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's our true value. And so this whole mentorship subject, I think, is so important. Well, okay, this is very good. Let's talk about human learning and digital technology. I know some of what you talk about. As I said, I mentioned earlier, I saw you speak for Dr. Dollywall, a wonderful oral surgeon in the Seattle area, and I guess those were all his referring doctors. I'm very interested in, as a practice manager, in the relationship between the specialists and the general dentists, and this integration and coordination with this incredible digital technology. And I'm interested, and I get this question too, how do we keep the human side of education alive? You know, we have all of this digital innovation, and it's amazing technology, but the human factor, and you've already touched on this, so forgive me if I'm asking you a question that you've already answered, but I think it's something to look at.
Yeah, it is. And I think if you look at the facets of education right now, and you have large podium meetings where you have hundreds of dentists that come, and those are great. You know, I harken back to Sales Study Club's symposium that they have every year. It's an incredible meeting. You have some of the top clinicians that are speaking. You just have a lot of really high energy that's going on, and you feed off that when you're in the room. And I think that's an amazing meeting, and I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. And then you have kind of like a smaller local study club, which I encourage everybody to join. There's zero downside to it. I mean, you're in your community. It's easy to do. It's usually on an evening or a day or something like that. You don't have to travel anywhere, and you can get some incredible education that on the local level that's right in your backyard. And sometimes a lot of people miss on that. But not only are you getting education, but you're forming relationships in your community, which I think are important.
Yeah, no
and then
doubt.
you have what we talked about, which is the online portion. I think the smaller meeting, like what you attended, Alan, is probably my favorite. And I'm kind of at every one of those deals, large podiums, medium podiums, and then small venues. And if you have to ask me what I think, I love those small meetings that are with a specialist, either a periodontist or oral surgeon, an orthodontist, and endodontist, where you have a multi-specialty group, and you have about 12 to 15 GPs, and you're all getting together, and you have a presenter like myself and a couple other people that come in and give a presentation. And you're in this kind of small, intimate group setting where you're sharing ideas, you're sharing clinical content, managerial content, leadership content, all of it. And you're forming and forging those relationships that can really transcend your practice into being a transactional practice, which is drill, fill, bill, and next person up, to being more of a relationship type practice where the people become like family. And you start to really enjoy dentistry. You start doing dentistry that you really love to do, and you get some inspiration. And I love those small, if you ask me, I would do those small events every single day of the week. So I think that's going to be, I think the future going forward are just going to be those events. I think you're going to see more and more surgeons and getting together with their 10 to 12 to 15 GPs, and then bringing cases. I say this all the time. I say, you know, we have a whole day devoted to diagnosis and treatment planning, and we'll get 12 general dentists, and only 4 of them will bring a case to the session. And it's a huge miss because, and I get it. I mean, I know that they don't want to look foolish in front of their peers, but that's really the only way that you learn. And guess what? Everybody else knows they don't know either. So, you know, it's one of those things that until you bring those cases, until you be humbled in front of in front of everybody, say, listen, I just need help on this case. I have no idea where to go. That I think is where, I think that's where dental education is going to go. I don't think diagnosis and treatment planning is never going to change. I don't care if you put it in the digital aspect or if you put it in a big meeting, it doesn't matter. But that rolling up your sleeves and getting down with the young doctors and the medium doctors and saying, okay, let's talk about cases. Teeth are teeth. Dentistry is dentistry. It doesn't matter if it's in Portland. It doesn't matter if it's in Florida. It doesn't matter if it's in New York City. Dentistry is dentistry, and teeth are teeth, and people are people. So I think that's where I think we're going to be going to this humanistic. I love digital. As you know, you saw it in my presentation. I mean, I'm a fully digital dentist now. I eat it all up. I mean, I always tell people, if you want to talk about impressions and analog, I'm not your guy. Don't come ask me speak, because I don't have anything to give you. But I think as from an educational standpoint, I think, if we can get to these people in person in these small groups and help them diagnose and treatment plan, it'll make a seismic difference in their practice, 100%.
Without a doubt. I think back when I was building my first company, which became arguably the largest dental practice management group in the country, which I sold many years ago. But I used to go out and do study clubs study club talks, but there'd be like a half a dozen or 10 doctors there. And it was exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about. I don't recall necessarily that they were bringing cases, because they were bringing me in to speak about management issues. But they were small. They were just real relationship building. It wasn't just social time. They were just building professional relationships. And then, of course, and I think with the model, and listen, Seattle Study Club, Spear, they've done wonderful things in terms of their training over the years. But for learning, for real learning and practice building, there's nothing like those smaller study clubs. So I kind of think back at, I remember going to these talks and these little study club meetings. They were small, they were intimate, but they were great. Anyway, I'm with you completely.
So I want to piggyback off that one. I just want to jump into my quick question on that one. Is there a piece of advice that you find yourself repeating at almost every seminar and lecture that you give?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah. Diagnosis and treatment planning.
Still.
Yeah. So when I was a resident, I'm going to go shout out to Dr. John Thurman. He was our program director. And I swear every single day that we would come in, he would ask us, okay, what are we going to do today? And you'd be like, well, because you'd be talking about your cases for the day, kind of like you do in a practice where you have a morning huddle. We had a huddle before we started our day when I was a resident. And I'd say, oh, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And he'd stop me and say, no. What are we going to do today? And I'd say, we're going to diagnose and we're going to treatment plan. He's like, there we go. Okay, let's get going. And so finally, so that was kind of beaten into our head for 2 years. And I would say that's the fundamental theme I see, because it all comes down to that. When I get cases that come into my practice where things have gone south and dentist referred it and everybody's, pretty upset because the case didn't go where it wanted to go. And I meet with the dentist and meet with the patient, and we can always trace it back to the diagnosis and the treatment plan. If that would have been correct, it would have made life a lot easier and a lot less stressful for everybody involved. So at the end of the day, we're just never going to shake that. And so we can talk about, the intraoral scanning and CBCTs and an integration of both. And we can talk about, photogrammetry and full arch digital workflows. We can talk about all that stuff. But at the end of the day, if we didn't diagnose whether that case was a full arch case versus an arch with implants, or just whether it was a tooth case, opening vertical dimension, I'm using all these big terms, right? But if we didn't get that right from the jump, then everything else then is just going to unwind. And so I think that is going to be 100% the most critical part of continuing education going forward, because it will never go away. My intraoral scanner in about a year or two from now is going to be out of date, right? We're going to have to get another one. And there'll be another piece of technology that's going to come out that's going to change how we capture the data and how we manipulate the data. And all that's going to be the same. But the diagnosis, the treatment plan, and the rules of fixed and removable prosthodontics will never change. They're just never going to change. And so I think that is going to be the fundamental thing. That's what I talk about and what I try to stress on every single case that I go to. Every course that I go to and every course that I give is just that. It's that simple.
Wow.
Yeah. Excellent advice, Pat. I must say that, for those who are listening to you or will be watching this podcast, and many will, because we distribute the podcast through LinkedIn, but then we send out smaller pieces all over through a whole bunch of channels. And for those who are watching you and hearing this and hearing you, your how do I say this? You're the furthest thing from pedantic that I can imagine, and it's so comfortable. It's so nice. And I recall in Seattle when you were talking, it's very similar. It's relaxed and it's conversational, and I think this is, we consider ourselves educators also. I mean, yes, we're called consultants, but really what we do, our importance is educating, imparting knowledge that individuals can absorb and then use. So I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, I think one thing we have to talk about though is the education that we are going to be seeing going forward needs to be practical. You know, I mean, I go to like I go to meetings too, and I go to plenty of presentations, and I see the information that's presented, and I see some beautiful dentistry that's being done, but the information sometimes isn't very practical. And I think we don't ever want to address the elephant in the room, which is profitability. And so I think the information that we're presenting going forward needs to be practical. We need to get super granular. We need to talk about how and how we structure our fees. How do we do payment arrangements? How do we do consent forms?
Yeah.
That's all the stuff that's on people's brains. And it's awesome to show you all of my digital smile designs and everything like that, which we do. But then going to that next step, being like, okay, well, this is what the patient, this is what was important to them. This is how we presented the treatment, right? And this was the fee, and this is how we structured this over time. And this is the consent form we use, and this is the financial arrangement that we did. That's everything that people want to know about. They want to know practical information they can take back to their practices on Monday morning, institute it, and become profitable. Yes. And I don't think there's anything wrong with discussing profitability, because guess what? It's on every single person's mind that's sitting in the audience. And for somehow we've thought that, we that would be taboo to discuss that in a continuing education event. And I think those days are over. I think that's what people are starving to know. And that's one of the things I think has separated us on the educational side for people that are coming more and more to our lectures, because we're discussing practical stuff.
Yes.
We're not talking about pie in the sky dentistry that is not achievable. Now, that doesn't mean, we got away from thinking that beautiful dentistry is going to be cutting corners and not doing it. That's not true. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do beautiful dentistry and become profitable.
Yes.
And I saw that with my grandfather for decades, and so I think it's one thing that we need to discuss. And I think, that's one thing I discussed with Gary at Sales, who's the new Sales Study Club CEO, Gary Dickinson. And I said, I said, Gary, for the next 10 years, I'm carrying the mantle here a little bit, but I said, my job is to really give, dentists the practicality side of education for this, and to give them how to make a tangible difference in the practice, not just a few pearls that they can bring back and use the next week. I'm talking about making a dent in their career. How do we get them to completely make a 180 or take a different turn and tangibly do something in their practice that they're going to use for the rest of their lives, not just a few little things? That doesn't do us any good.
Yeah. Excellent, Pat. Great advice. You know that I'm in complete this. I mean, this is what we do. The marriage of the practical, you call it practical. It's the business side. It's just, a business has to make a profit. If it doesn't make a profit, then the practitioner, they can't do what they need to do. And so the marriage and integration of the management side and the clinical side are extremely important. I think it's great that you touch on that. And I know you and I have talked about teaming up on that, and I'm excited about that. And I look forward to doing that in the future. Well,
yeah, me too.
Pat, how do tell our listeners how they can contact you, and they should.
Yeah.
If there's somebody out there who wants a speaker who can really connect with an audience, Pat is a guy who can certainly do that. And the people that you get to that event are really going to appreciate it. So Pat, tell our listeners how they can reach you.
Yeah, they can always reach out to me via email. So it's Dr. Lillis, so DRLILLIS @mac.com. You can also follow him on Instagram at Dr. Lillis, so at Dr. Lillis. And then you can also come to our website, opdentaldesign.com. And those are the three ways and then there's a link portal that you can go through the website as well to contact our office. And then you can contact me personally, and I'm always happy to help in any way. And if I can help people personally, then I know people in the industry such as yourself and many, many others that I can point them in the right direction. So
wonderful.
Yeah, always feel free to reach out.
Yeah, good. There's a ticker that will show up here where that contact information is visible. So certainly I would encourage anybody to contact you.
Yeah.
who's looking for what you're talking about. Pat, great having you here. Just really, really enjoyed this, and look forward to speaking to you again soon. I'm sure we'll be doing that. If you liked this today's episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Spotify or iTunes, and watch for other upcoming